1st Congressional District, which stretches from hang on. Good evening and aloha. I'm U.S. Congressman Ed Case. I proudly represent Hawaii's 1st Congressional District. As you know, Hawaii has 2 members of the U.S. House of Representatives. I represent District number 1. District number 1 stretches all the way from Makapu'u in the east to Mililani to Waipahu, Eva Beach, Kapolei, and Ko'olina in the west. 730,000 people live in my district, and I represent you in Congress. I also represent the 2nd Congressional District indirectly, since in Hawaii, basically both of our U.S. representatives represent the entire state. That's how we've always done it. And so it is my pleasure tonight to present another of my ongoing live talk story community meetings to address issues of concern to you, to listen to your thoughts and to answer your questions. Before we get into tonight's subject, just a couple of the details of our event. I'm going to do an intro for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to introduce our special guests, and then we're going to get into a discussion and answer your questions. To ask any questions, just post them to Facebook, and they'll get to me, and we'll get them into the discussion. If there's anything you want to talk about on the subject of tonight's presentation or otherwise, but don't want to do it here, or your questions didn't get answered, or you just want more information, case.house.gov is my website. That's an entry into my office, case.house.gov. And also email me at ed.case@mail.house.gov, ed.case@mail.house.gov. Now on to our topic of discussion this evening. And the first thing I would say is that this topic was not invented by me. It was raised by you. A lot of people have asked me about cybersecurity. They have asked not only, out of wanting to know what it's all about, but what are we doing about it? And so this is really driven by folks that have asked me to go ahead and present something along these lines, and I'm happy to do it. I would say up front, I'm no expert on cybersecurity. I need to know enough to make decisions in Congress, but I have a lot of experts around me that help me to understand it. And so I'm not going to be able to answer the technical questions, but we can certainly try to get answers to you. So cybersecurity, what is cybersecurity? Why should it concern us all? What is your government doing about it at all levels? And what should you worry about it? What can you do about cybersecurity? That's what we're going to try to cover tonight. So let me start by attempting to define cybersecurity. I think we all know that in today's world, our computer systems, our software, our operations, and how it all connects with each other on that shadowy thing called the internet, the collective technology of all of this are central to how we get our information, how we communicate with each other, and how we operate across all parts of our life, every single part of our life, talking about personal, to our businesses, to our governments, to defense and non-defense parts of our government, the collective tissue of all of that, which is really known as cyberspace, is all very, very integrated, highly interdependent series of networks, infrastructure, and data, again, operating in cyberspace. And this cyberspace is subject almost by definition to attacks, to disrupt it, to manipulate it, and protecting against those attacks and preventing them and dealing with them when they happen is called cybersecurity. So that's my attempt to define cybersecurity. And cybersecurity is about preventing, as I said, attacks, anticipating them, preventing them, dealing with them when they happen. And really the risk of cybersecurity attacks depends on a number of different factors. The first factor would be the threats. Where do the threats of cyber attacks come from? Where do we have to provide cybersecurity? Well, there's a couple of different areas. Number one, just outright criminals who are out to really extort primarily money from us in terms of attacking our cyberspace. whether it's to extort money from preventing us from doing something that we otherwise would do on the net, to stealing our information. Criminals are very eager and willing to take advantage of cyberspace to launch cyber attacks. Spies, all of the information is online in some way, shape, or form. We protect it, but other people want that information, whether it be national security spies in kind of the classic sense, or industrial spies who are trying to get at information for our businesses, proprietary information, how we build our systems, how we maintain our systems. Nation state adversaries, unfortunately, the cyberspace being the domain of how we conduct ourselves as a nation, whether it be our national defense, whether it be the projection of our economic abilities across the board. That is all part of us being a country, and other countries may well want to attack our cyber security, our cyber networks. And we see that happening, by the way, today as we speak, because a whole part of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is about cybersecurity. It is happening in the cyber domain there, as well as what we see on the ground. Hacktivists, people that want to hack into systems for various reasons, and finally just outright terrorists who are conducting terror in cyberspace just as they conduct terror in the real world. Those are the threats. The vulnerabilities to these threats are attacks by insiders, people that get inside systems and attack from inside the systems. You can also see attacks from supply chains within that cyber network, whether they be software or hardware from that perspective. And sometimes we also have vulnerabilities that we don't even know about, because people are always trying to exploit vulnerability and finding new vulnerabilities. And so we're always trying to anticipate where the next weakness is and how to get ahead of it before somebody finds it and attacks it. And then finally, the impacts of cyber attacks could be cyber theft and cyber espionage. I've talked about that already. Denial of service, denial of the ability to go on. We all bank, for example, on the internet. If somebody gets on and prevents us from banking at all, then that creates obvious issues for us in our lives. Botnet control impacts where basically people gain control of our networks and manipulate them for their own purposes. And then finally, industrial control systems, where whole industrial capacities are taken over. We've seen some of that, and perhaps our guests can give us some examples. Just a couple of statistics to indicate the nature of the problem and extent of the problem. And here I'm talking only from the personal side, not from the business side, not from the defense side, not from the government side. We estimate that in the United States alone, about 90,000 of us are affected by cyber crimes in every month, 90,000 of us. We have the highest rate of cybercrime in the world by some calculations, somewhere around $6 trillion of damage from cybercrime. Annually, somewhere around 60% of Americans believe that they have been impacted in some way, shape, or form. And about 70% by all estimates of small businesses who have a lot of trouble having the necessary resources to protect against cyber attacks are really completely unprepared for a cyber attack. So those are pretty defining and concerning statistics, and they should be. So what is your federal government, because I am your federal government, what is your federal government doing about all of this? Where is the federal government role in cybersecurity? Well, the first part of our role is to protect our own systems, because our systems are completely in cyberspace as well, defense and non-defense. Your Social Security records are in cyberspace. Medicare is operated in cyberspace. Virtually all of the COVID-19 emergency relief that we funded throughout our country occurred in some way, shape, or form in cyberspace, and was actually subject to cyber attacks during the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the defense realm, of course, it's key that we are able to protect our systems from cyber attack and be able to maintain their integrity, be able to maintain their capabilities. And we have a great deal of money and effort going into that from a defense perspective. Second, your federal government assists non-federal government entities and people in training and developing best practices against cyber attacks. So basic cybersecurity prevention, we spend a lot of money there to help everybody else in the country, aside from the federal government, to protect against cyber attacks. And then finally, your federal government prosecutes cybercrime, because all of what I've talked about is in fact a crime. Primarily, it is a federal crime, and the federal government prosecutes federal crimes as federal violations, and people can go to federal prisons for that. And so that's your general federal government role. This is very, very fluid stuff in Congress. The basic framework of how we carry out our federal role is fairly well laid out, but cybersecurity, almost by definition, is a very highly fast-moving, fluid area of our national policy as both our computer systems and operations progress and get more and more sophisticated. And with it, cyber criminals and cybercrime gets far more sophisticated. And so our laws and our regulations and our spending to back up our federal role have to also adjust with the times. A couple of the areas that I get involved in this are just to name two or three examples of where in my office we have been part of the efforts to prevent cyber attacks, are to outright improve our overall federal programs for small businesses. That was actually an amendment that I offered to a recent bill that went through Congress called the Competes Act, which was a much bigger bill dealing with really our ability to compete better on an international basis. But as part of that bill, my amendment would focus much more attention on helping small businesses. Big businesses have a little bit more resources, a little bit more expertise, but the vulnerability in my view is really in our small businesses, and Hawaii being a small business state, we need help in that area. We also just need better data on exactly what is happening in cybercrime and what is happening in the cyber attack realm. I have been involved in initiatives to ramp up data collection and data distribution so we can all understand what's going on. Senator Schatz has actually led this over on the Senate side. He's been quite involved in this area for quite a while. And then finally, this all takes money. Everything that we are talking about takes money to operate. And in that area, I sit on the Appropriations Committee, which is responsible for all federal funding every fiscal year, discretionary funding, that is, meaning the funding that doesn't happen just automatically from year to year, like Social Security and Medicare. So we're talking about somewhere around $1.5 trillion a year that our Appropriations Committee basically divvies up throughout government. And in this area, we've seen rapid increases in federal funding to the three federal roles, that being protecting our federal information systems, assisting and protecting non-federal systems, and prosecuting cybercrime. The primary federal agency under a law we passed back in 2014 is called CISA. That is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, which is our attempt to pull all of this together into one place to be able to coordinate across all of the federal government, our cybersecurity prevention and prosecution efforts. And we funded CISA to the tune of about $2.6 billion in the current fiscal year, which was a substantial increase over the prior fiscal year. I should say also on the defense side that CISA is really the non-defense side of it, although it obviously interacts with many other federal agencies from Department of Homeland Security and on. But we have really comparable efforts in our defense and intelligence communities as well. In fact, in our defense community, we actually have an entire military command that is devoted to this, which is called U.S. Cyber Command, which is really comparable in many ways to the Air Force, to the Army, et cetera. And that's the importance that we attach to this. Cyber Command is responsible not only for defensive measures in terms of protecting our military systems, but in a war, it is also responsible for offensive projection of cyber capabilities against the enemy, and they prepare for that on a regular basis. And again, that's not a hypothetical. It is actually happening today in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where Russia is certainly engaged in cyber attacks against Ukraine and others, and certainly we are assisting Ukraine with the defense and with its own efforts. So there's a lot going on in the federal government, but I've talked long enough, and I want to get in to our evening with our guests, and I'm really happy to have a very good group of folks that are joining me here tonight, and I'm just going to introduce each of you briefly, and then turn it over to you. First of all, we have Jimmie Collins. Jimmie is the Chief of Planning and Operations at the Hawaii State Office of Homeland Security. She's had that position since February of 2020. She is responsible for essentially leading a comprehensive and integrated Homeland Security program for the state of Hawaii to include cybersecurity. So she's, I think, will tell us that she's really the state partner to many of these efforts. We also have Vincent Wong, the Chief Information Security Officer for the Office of Enterprise Technology Services for the state of Hawaii. He has had that job since 2016, and he's essentially responsible at the state level for establishing cybersecurity standards for the executive branch and ensuring that system operations stay current with best practices. So really the state equivalent of CISA in some ways. If I can use that analogy to make sure that our state systems, all of which are operating in the same way as the federal government, with heavy reliance upon cyberspace to administer all of our state programs. He has really been in this area for 20 years, so really happy to have him. And finally, Attila Seress, right? Did I get that right? Attila Seress, president of Silanda, which is a cybersecurity and IT management firm. Attila has been president since 2019. Since 2007, Silanda has met office technology needs of hundreds of companies. So he's on the front lines of really our businesses, our small business in terms of cybersecurity, and has a long and interesting career before that. So I've got three great experts here tonight to help me kind of sort through this and give you the practical information you may need. So I'm just going to start by asking each of you what exactly you do, and perhaps if you could, as you say what you do, talk about what you think the biggest concerns you have are in your job. Okay, Jimmie, let's start with you.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for that introduction. So in my position as the Chief of Planning and Operations for Homeland Security, I actually manage the cybersecurity program for the state, so statewide, not specific like Vince's job as CISO is for state entities, but a broader constituency, if you will. So we do planning of things like disruption response or incident response plans. But more importantly, we're actually charged with developing a holistic plan for cybersecurity to include engagement at the individual and the small and medium-sized business level to kind of do a far and broad span of interactions. The program is relatively new. We just established the Homeland Security strategy at the end of last calendar year, so 2021. And in that strategy, it called for this program to be developed, as well as a critical infrastructure, a security and resilience program, and an emerging threats. And all three of those kind of commingle in the cybersecurity space. And so we're busily looking at what we need to do and what kinds of elements of cybersecurity we would like to instill across the board, across the state. and how we can actually partner with entities that do more individual outreach for entities like the small and medium-sized businesses or actual individuals. See if we can develop some partnerships there, since that's a little askew of our typical mission space. But that's kind of the ecosystem that I occupy from Homeland Security, looking at ways to respond, but most importantly, look at some prevention and protection efforts for, from all the big entities like our electricity sector or subsector, all the way down to, your mom or grandma.
So a quick question, and then I'll move on, and we can come back for more questions. But Hawaii Office of Homeland Security. So this is the state of Hawaii. This the government of the state of Hawaii.
Yes.
Homeland Security Office.
Right. Yeah, we reside
you,
under the Department of Defense with the Guard and with the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency.
Okay, so this is the collection of agencies that are basically responsible for securing Hawaii, the Hawaii state, against risks, against emergencies, whether they be physical or outright attack or
attacks,
hurricanes,
right,
or anything like that. And of course,
yeah, broadly speaking, DoD, the state DoD has that whole broad mission mandate. And then within each of the departments, or in each of the divisions, we take Homeland Security, so threat-based issues, typically man-made issues, where the Emergency Management Agency is looking more like, natural threats, hurricanes, that kind of thing.
And you must interact then with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security?
Oh, daily. Yeah. Yeah. We have some really great representatives, both for protective advisory folks, as well as cybersecurity advisors, and the obviously their headquarters folks, but within Hawaii itself, we've got just under a half dozen DHS folks that I'd say almost on a daily basis we're involved with. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's come back to you. I got plenty of questions, but I better just do a quick round up front. Vince, a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and what keeps you up at night.
Well, great. Thank you for having me. Excited to be participating on this panel. My name again is Vince Wong. I'm the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Hawaii. My team and I, we operate out of the State Office of Enterprise Technology Services. Our role and function of ETS is to serve as the central IT agency within the executive branch of the state. And the cybersecurity team that reports to me, the group of us are responsible for securing our state infrastructure and its data. And as far as what keeps me up at night, it's hard for me to sleep. My troubles is just better sleep, better self-care in a sense. And one of the ways to get better at that is communicate that good cybersecurity is IT done well. A large part of our role and function is not only to provide the guidance, but also provide the helping hands to help the state agencies secure and protect the infrastructure. The analogy that I would refer to is like a rising tide lifts all boats. So where the state agencies that do have a report up into us to receive that guidance, we are more directed and work closely at hand with them. But for the other agencies or branches that don't fall under our purview, so to speak, such as the legislative agencies or the judiciary. From there, it is extending the olive branch, partnering very, very closely with them to help ensure that their infrastructure is protected as well. We have the additional service provider function of providing the network connectivity to the legislative branch and judiciary, in addition to the Office of Homeland Affairs. So in a sense, we're kind of like a cornucopia of various responsibilities. In some areas, we provide guidance, others we act as a service provider, but largely across all agencies, whether they report up to us or not, is good team building partnerships so that we can help protect the entire state government infrastructure.
Okay, so when you say so you're primarily focused on the executive branch, so the
Correct,
governor's
yes.
office and all of the departments of the state government, but you do not actually directly work on, oversee, protect the legislative branch or the judicial branch. That's a little bit of a surprise to me, because I thought we would have coordinated that all at this point and brought it under, one umbrella. And it actually makes me think about the federal government as well, because I believe that's the case in the federal government as well, where really when I talk about CISA at the federal level, the master agency responsible for protecting the federal government, I don't think they have direct line responsibility over Congress, or the Supreme Court or the federal courts.
Correct. So it's a lot of partnership, but we do on the ETS side, we do support the network security elements of for the other branches, and so that's some additional areas of responsibility. But as far as the actual administration, the day-to-day, and of the endpoints and the systems and servers within those branches, no, it gets to the partnership aspect. What I kind of try to promote and is that building a team within ETS so that we can run fast and hard, and we'll break ground, and wherever we find accomplishments and that for systems that can scale, then we'll partner with the other branches and provide our lessons learned, and so that they can adopt a lot sooner and help avoid some of the footfalls that we may have encountering by trying to push on so aggressively.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll come back to you, Attila. First of all, I think we've all been commenting about that's just a really, really cool backdrop. Are you actually there because you just look like you're in command central? You like cybersecurity, you have control of cybersecurity, and nobody is going to penetrate your systems.
That's part of being on the front line. We're here. We're protecting. I guess I'm in the corner of the private sector. So anyone who's listening that's in the private sector, that's probably who I'm talking to. We protect very well-known local brands who are in the private sector, everything from energy to transportation to banking and financial services, that kind of thing. And what keeps me up at night is having our local economy be disrupted by these bad actors. And unfortunately, we do get the calls regularly about problems that come up. We try to do our best to fight the fires once they've broken out, but really prevention is the best way to go. The world climate is different than it was even just a few years ago. I mean, me personally, I'm kind of like this, child of an immigrant family that came here escaping communist rule from a Russian invasion of Hungary. My grandparents came here, and I saw these stories and I heard these stories growing up. I was kind of instilled with this sense of purpose to protect others, to protect our community, and especially when it came to helping people be free of oppression. So when the opportunity came to create a company and kind of build this team with this sense of purpose, and with my technology background, it became clear that the next war that we would all be facing here and the adversaries we'd be facing would all be digital. So this company that I founded almost 20 years ago was born from this kind of sense of duty and this vision of freedom for the people of Hawaii from these faceless enemies. We don't want them to do us harm from these far off lands. And so that's our mission. That's what keeps me up at night. How do we keep the community safe? I really appreciate having others in this conversation who prevent these kind of problems from occurring in other parts of the economy. It's just where we are. We're in the private sector, and that's, like you said, is where most of Hawaii is, and we really want to help protect them.
So I used a statistic that I have seen on the national level that 70% of small businesses are virtually completely unprepared against a cyber attack. Do you buy that stat?
Yeah, it's actually a lot worse. So the statistic is that 60% of businesses that suffer a breach will go out of business in 6 months. It's higher. I've seen it happen. An accounting firm gets hit with a ransomware attack. The data is breached. All their client data ends up out on the dark web. And then over the next 6 months, you don't hear about it, right? 6 to 8 months, the clients slowly go away. They don't come back. It's hard to get back up and running again. And then it's just another statistic, right? So it's kind of hard to kind of pinpoint that was the one thing that killed them, but it does. We see these ransomware demands, $500,000, $1 million. data breaches, exfiltrations. Exfiltration is when they take the data from inside of a company, sneak it out the back door, and then they demand a ransom or they're going to let it out. So sometimes there's not even no, interruption in business operations. It's just they've stolen the data and that's out there, and that has value too. And these kind of actions that we talk about, these kind of bad actors, and it's no longer this big nation state. It can be anyone. Anyone with just a few dollars can go on, and you can get ransomware as a service, attack as a service. They can jump inside a major company's network by leveraging entire networks of just buy as you go type of attack vectors. So we're not seeing a decrease. We're seeing an increase because it has become so commercialized and so easy to do.
Okay, well, I want to come back to you on a number of issues. I'll just take one or two questions here to start with so that we get our questions answered. From Val, and I'm just going to read it. Lawmakers need to get on it and create consequences. Cybersecurity is just one aspect. What should be done to those who knowingly commit cyber crimes? I think I mentioned earlier that one of the federal government's three main roles in cyber security is to prosecute cybercrime. And like I said, cybercrime is a crime, a federal crime, and is subject to prosecution, to imprisonment, to heavy fines. And we devote a lot of time and resources to rooting out cybercrime and to actually prosecuting it. A couple of the areas that we are involved in at the federal level. First of all, we have a very interesting institution called the National Computer Forensic Institute, which is really a state-of-the-art 40,000 square foot or so facility, which is located in Alabama. And this is our nation's premier law enforcement training facility in cyber and electronic crime forensics. So by that, what I mean is, if an attack has occurred, exactly what happened and who did it? How do you take that crime scene apart, just like any other crime scene? The forensics of a crime scene, and every cyber attack has its evidence left behind. You just have to piece it together and determine who did it, and then go after them and prosecute them under federal law. And speaking of that, the FBI is involved in cybercrime. The FBI has a complete division devoted to cybercrime. It's cyber division that is involved in investigating these crimes as well as other threats. We can definitely provide information on numbers that the FBI welcomes you to contact them with any perceived cybercrime or concern over cybercrime. We have the Internet Crime Complaint Center, which is a partnership between the FBI and the National White Collar Crime Center, which is essentially focused on online fraud, really from that point, the white collar in the business and personal area. We have within the Department of Homeland Security, the Secret Service is one of the primary agencies combating cybercrime. We know the Secret Service as really protecting the president and the vice president and others. But they are also involved in many other aspects, for example, counterfeiting and now cybercrime. They're one of the largest actors. They have a cyber intelligence unit, financial crimes task force, electronic crime task force. And so there are many efforts to the question to identify cybercrime and find those responsible and prosecute it. So it's very serious undertaking. One of the real challenges in cybercrime is that you can commit these crimes from anywhere in the world. I mean, you don't have to be at the actual physical scene of the crime. You can be anywhere in the world and commit a cybercrime. And so we spend a lot of time as well connecting up with international agencies that are dealing with cybercrime, as well as our partner countries around the world. And we regularly prosecute and try to extradite people to this country to face U.S. courts and do time in U.S. prisons. So that's what we're trying to do along those lines. And actually, I think that probably answered Grace's question here. What if the cybercrime is committed overseas? Well, it's a crime where it is committed, and it's a crime in our country if the victim is in our country. And so again, we cooperate with international law enforcement agencies, which increasingly have cybercrime components to them to focus on cybercrime specifically. We need to have partners around the world to work with. Unfortunately, where we have countries like Russia, who, for all intents and purposes, are pursuing state-sponsored cybercrime through private actors associated with the government of Russia, as a way to attack enemies. Of course, it's very, very difficult to do that because Russia is not allowing us to go after those private actors inside of Russia. In fact, they're sponsoring them. And so that becomes a matter of national security, national defense, and national action from a defense perspective, not just a non-defense perspective. So it's definitely a challenge given the nature of cybercrime. Let's see. Third question, also from Grace. What are some of the security threats within small businesses like loans? So let's go back to you, Attila, on that one. What are some of the security threats within small businesses? Let's take your classic bank conducting a loan. The bank has personal financial information on me. When I apply for my loan, I have to tell them, I have to basically give them all of my financial information, stuff that I really wouldn't want anybody to know. They're under an obligation of confidentiality, but how is my information protected against cyber attack?
Well, different industries are subject to different levels of compliance. And compliance is a real scary word in the private sector. Sometimes the impression is that it's someone's going to come and tell you how to do things. But really what it is compliance are rules of the road we all agree to follow so that we can all operate safely. And banks are no different. They have several devices in place that monitor network traffic for anything unusual. That these are sometimes physical hardware boxes, but much of your data is, like you mentioned, stored in the cloud. So they're in private data centers that are controlled access and have safeguards in place so that your data does not get exposed. Now, I can speak from personal experience, seeing just the kind of increase in attacks we've seen against small businesses here. Kind of pedaling back a little bit about what small businesses need to worry about. Think about prime and sub contractors. So those who do business with federal entities, right? They're all also subject to compliance, right? And compliance means that you're going to have some best practices in place in your organization. Now, if you don't have those best practices in place, the consequences are pretty bad. Not only can you perhaps lose that contract that you're participating in, maybe not when it comes time for renewal, but if there is a breach, then all of a sudden you can be blacklisted. It could make it very difficult for you to continue operations in general. And when I say breach, I want to be really kind of specific about that. What that means is that something inside of your organization, some private data, either of your employees, of a project that you're working on, something that could be considered confidential or sensitive, ends up getting out of your control. And once it gets out of your control, it can be sold. It can be disclosed. And that can be something as very simple as a list of investors in your business, which then become targets, right, by bad actors. It could be payroll information. And we've unfortunately seen that as well. Payroll is now becoming a target where fictitious employees can be created inside of your payroll portal, and all of a sudden they're being paid. And you may not notice this as an employer until several weeks or months goes by and those staff members are not getting paid appropriately. So they can get in very insidiously. It's not a simple smash and grab anymore. These APTs can get inside and watch your organization. And the reason that Hawaii is such a target right now versus the way it was even just a few years ago is because we have become the front line of defense for Asia. We've become this place where we are now, from what I hear, we're also upgrading our infrastructure here at Kebe, not because there's a reduction in threat, because there's an increase in threat, and any sort of way that they can get inside of the supply chain for anyone who's working on any of those projects and they can move laterally into those networks and disrupt those kind of those physical defenses that we're creating from a cyber perspective. So I know I'm kind of bouncing around a lot on a lot of different things here, and we can talk about specific ways that organizations can protect themselves from doing this stuff. And I'm sure we'll get to that as we talk, but there's lots of resources that are, some are mandatory, but some are optional. And I encourage you to try to implement some of those optional ones before there is a breach, before there's an incident, because the remediation process afterwards is very painful.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you on some of the practical pointers there. Jimmie, a little bit more about kind of, your day-to-day concerns and how do you actually, I guess I think what I'm interested in, what perhaps listeners might be interested in, is how do we actually protect against cyber attack? I mean, what are we, what physically, or what actually do we do to do that? How do we do it?
Oh, I would love to talk about that. So,
okay, let me. I'm gonna stay with Jimmie for now, and I'll come back to you. But I'm gonna cover you on the business side. But how does the state of Hawaii protect itself against cyber attack?
Oh, well, it's complex and simple, both at the same time. And Vince and I have had many a chat about how to do what we do better. And that's really what it comes down to, is do the basics, get the basics right. If you're told to change your password, you need to change your password. There's a protocol and there's a reason behind those very basic things. When we see all of these attacks, whether they're small dollar or big dollar, it's really the basic vulnerabilities that they're picking apart at. It's a spam email to one of your employees who just wasn't having a great day and didn't get the trainings, completely sunk in, and they clicked on that attachment and there you go. I mean, time and time again, there are so many targets, if you will, out there that aren't getting the basics right, that's where I think the majority of the adversary effort is going to, because why train to have your cyber warrior if all you really need is a cyber Boy Scout, because the guys on the other side aren't doing their security job. And so I think that's even with all of the messages that we've seen come out from the federal government in relation to Ukraine and those cyber threats, we're really seeing a lot of reiteration of, get your patching done, make sure you've got appropriate kinds of backup in the right place, and all of those things. So I think, it's really getting incredibly good at basics will really elevate the whole game that we have here, whether it's the government or private sector or just individuals. And the other thing,
are the basic rules the same whether you're somebody sitting at home with a home computer, not a whole bunch of activity but enough to be concerned about, or whether you're a county government, or whether you're a business, or whether you're a nonprofit, or whether you're the entire federal government, or whether you're the U.S. Army? Are the basics the same in terms of protecting yourself against
and I'll definitely I'd love to bounce it over to Attila and Vince for their feedback too, but to be quite honest, the kinds of incidents that we're seeing, if the basics had been done, no matter who the target was, then you wouldn't have the remediation, you wouldn't have the, I wrote that check or gave them my credit card for individual fraud. Some of the challenge, though, I will have to say, what gets different is how to get the message and the information out, depending on what the audience is. It's super challenging to get it down to an individual's level. I think the most aware of us are probably the ones that use cyber tools. We use computers and we use the internet in our day-to-day job. And the businesses we work for, the governments we work for, have set some protocols up that, you will do this and this is how it's going to go, because these are the basics. But when you're kind of left on your own and you may not have that kind of technical background at all, understanding where to get the information is probably at least as important as what the information says. So that's I caveat the between the different groups that way.
Right, and we'll get to that as we go on here, because one of the basics here is to get information out to people. Vince, one thing I'm not clear about is what's the difference between what you do and what Jimmie does for the state of Hawaii? I mean, you're both doing the same thing, right? Or are you not doing the same thing? Or I mean, what's the
A little bit different. I guess I'll try to speak then, and then we'll see how much Jimmie squirms, and then provide a response. So my role and function in the team here at ETS is we're responsible for the state infrastructure and the data. I mean, state government infrastructure. Whereas for OHS, Office of Homeland Security, and Jimmie's team, they have a broader plan where it is a statewide when it includes local government, the counties, and the private sector, and also the federal government, both civilian and military as well. So
okay, so your job is specific to the state of Hawaii, the state executive branch. And your job is to protect the information and the operations of the state of Hawaii in cyberspace.
Yes.
Very directly involved in that, and Jimmie is really responsible for the state of Hawaii's overall connections with the federal government, with the private sector, with overseas, and with getting information out, and with the totality of the state's effort to defend us all against cyber attacks. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think it's a fair characterization.
Okay, and so Vince, can you give an actual example, or if you can't, a hypothetical of an actual cyber attack against the state of Hawaii, and you know how it is conducted, and what the risk is, or what the consequence was, if it's a matter that you can talk about?
Sure. I'll start at a kind of a high level and just emphasize the basics. I'm hoping that for all of our listeners and observers, their take-home message today is that whether you're to help protect your own personal assets, or your organization, is really take home the messaging that the panelists are talking about and actually put it into action. For example, let's see how well this works, but here's my state phone. And this is one of the most critical security devices to protect my state account. Why? It's because if I'm on the internet, or someone's trying to log in as me on the internet, I'm going to get a little push to this phone to help provide some validation that, hey, is it really Vince that's trying to log in or not? And on the personal side, for the folks that are really even more concerned about whether or not you use a mobile app for security, is there's a hardware token involved. So the difference here is that your phone, the bad actor, regardless of where they are in the world, or if you're on the moon or Mars, when we eventually have internet access over there, regardless of where you're coming from that has internet connectivity, they won't physically have access to this device that I'm holding in my hand. So this means when I get a push, I can approve, yes, was this really me trying to log in or not? And that provides much higher assurance. It's so effective in the sense that both Microsoft and Google, they're starting to, they offered it as an option in the past, but now they're making it mandatory for their subscribers. With Google going on this campaign about protecting your logins here, they're really, by default now, when you sign up for Google's enterprise mail, by default, you have to enable multi-factor authentication. And with Microsoft, they're going on the campaign now where that they're going to start switching the dial, meaning in the past, all new subscribers had to enroll in MFA. But if you're an old legacy, where you were using Microsoft previously, now they're starting to force your hand there as an existing customer. We're going to flip the switch now too. It's counterintuitive because for speed of service, you want to make it easy and transparent for someone to sign up, but everybody assumes that we have safe defaults. But the reality is, because we're so impatient as a culture, we want things to just work now. We put pressure on our vendors to make it as easy and seamless as possible. What this results in is creating a situation where we don't have good, solid security basics implemented, whether it's with our home accounts, our financial records, or it's within our organization. Right. And again, so for the folks, again, a take home is register your phones, minimally move away from your logins and static passwords. The 99% of the of the attacks are thwarted simply by using a phone with an SMS text-based authentication. If you want to take at a higher order and have more protections, don't use SMS and use a mobile app. But to take it even one step further, use a hardware token to help protect and then make yourself phishing resistant. So that's kind of high level as far as on the basics. I'm going to walk you through an example that we literally walked through yesterday here at the state, and it's related to a phishing attack potentially. What happened was that an email, a phishing email, went in and it plastered. It reached. Yes.
For people that are listening, what is phishing? Not with an F, but a PH. What is it?
All right. So phishing with a PH is an attempt to trick you into divulging whether your password or sensitive information, so that a bad actor can then use that for abuse.
What would be a classic phishing?
A common example that I see in mass right now is sending a fake invoice that's overdue, or here's a shipment that will be returned if you don't respond in time. And the goal here is to get you to divulge your credit card number or your username and password, which then could be used as a stepping stone for the bad actor to go in and commit more attacks. You had mentioned earlier on this session about the IC3, the Complete Center. I'm looking at a report from between June 2016 and December 21st. As far as expected dollar losses, it reached 43 billion, and that's from the business email compromise perspective. What this means is that when one organization gets phished, that individual user that fell for this scam, they lose their account. And then what happens afterwards is that account is being used to then send it off to their trusted contacts to help pull in and lure more victims in. And because of this process, they're able to, the bad actors are able to commit huge amounts of financial related fraud. Right? So.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. I feel that we spent the better part of an hour here just scaring the holy bejesus out of everybody, which is probably not a bad thing. But many of us are going about our lives as governments, as businesses, as personal folks, without at least suffering yet, at least from a cyber attack that has been consequential. So I mean, it is. I think it's correct to say that it's still the exception rather than the rule that one is actually subject to cyber attack. But I think the caution here is it can happen to anyone, any government, any business. And so let's try to switch a little bit from this can really happen and what actually does happen to how to prevent it. So Attila, you're just sitting there loaded for bear, I can tell. So go for it. Let's just cut to the chase. And I hope this answers some of the questions that I'm seeing. And by the way, let me just comment on some of the questions. I think, what are the prevention measures the public can take to safeguard against cybercrime? I think that's the question that I just asked. How do you protect hospital systems against cybercrime to avoid data compromise and ransom? How do we protect against the use of cybercrime for right-wing cyber extremism? Certainly, cyber attacks are used to forward political agendas as well, and to manipulate the political system. I mean, I forget what the stat is, but it's some unbelievable number, and I want to say from memory that there are somewhere in the range of, I want to say, 1 million attempted intrusions into the United States Congress's computer operations every day. Does that surprise anybody to hear that?
It's higher.
1 million people out there in some way, shape, or form trying to penetrate the United States Congress's cyber defenses. Now, that's not 1 million people doing it, because sometimes that's one person doing it a million times. But nonetheless, that's the scope of attack going on. And that's happening throughout our government, and yet we are in fact protecting against it. So what do we do about it? Let's just start with some real basics, Attila. Not real sophisticated, but just what are the basics here?
Well, I can tell you right now, as we've been talking, it's reminding me of all the victims that we've been helping just over the past few months. And Vince, he brought up a great point. Two-factor authentication, that's great. However, we've had about half a dozen cases so far this year that were victims of SIM swapping. What that means is that there's a social engineering attempt. So bad guy calls up, is able to trick the phone company into cloning your phone. They cry about, oh, we're out on vacation, we lost this cell phone, and we bought another one from a vendor, and we got this vending machine, SIM card. Can you please just swap it? And they call them. Now, this is for real. They will call them for 14 hours straight. So they'll have an entire call center overseas call 14 hours straight until they get someone from AT&T or T-Mobile or Verizon to allow them to do the swap. The moment they do that, they jump inside of email, which then allows them to springboard into crypto. So crypto is a big attack vector, right? So if there's been any breach of your information on Coinbase or any of these other currency exchanges, then that information, you become a target. That's how it happens. So we've seen the SIM swapping happen from everything from little old ladies who are running a small retail shop to contractors who are working on homes, who may have had like their wallet stolen, and all of a sudden now they've become because they deal with high value transactions, they have to deal with that. We've had SIM swapping on financial services folks, so those who are entrusted with managing money for others. So I'm trying to stay a little bit vague here, but just know that these are local members of our community who are victims of that. So I really do like Vince's recommendation to go with push notifications. That's when it will pop up on your phone. You have to hit allow. Many universities on the mainland already enforce this for all of their students. It is something that is well understood technology. So really start thinking about those kind of methods of protection. Reputation, social engineering. We were contacted by a family. It was very sad. They unfortunately had over $60,000 stolen from them. And it was because of a social engineering attack. And what that meant was that they built trust with one person in the family, and they got that one person to record a video saying how great this product or service was that they had been scammed into. And that scammer took that video and sent it to all their family members and took all their money, because they were like, oh, look, Chemo says this is a good product. We should go invest in it. And sure enough, they were able to wrangle some money out of them from there. Now, this is not something you can get your money back on. We talk pretty regularly about how social engineering does lead to electronic bank transactions. So they can interfere with a basic transaction. I'll give you another example that we had recently also. A person had their email compromised. Now, business email compromise, if you go to that IC3 report, always ends up on number 1 or number 2 on that list. Business email compromise means that they're inside your email box as an owner of your business or financial service, you're the CFO, something like that. They want those mailboxes, and they're just watching the emails go in and out until they see one that says, hey, we just did a service for your building. Let's just say it's a plumbing job, right? We do this plumbing job. Here's an invoice for $40,000. They see that invoice, and then they act. They say, oh, I'm so sorry. We've changed our electronic banking. Please send that payment to this other address. And, unfortunately, the victim does. Time goes on, and the plumbing company will then, let's just say plumbing company reaches out and says, hey, where's our money? It's been about a month. So, oh, we paid you a month ago. Why would, what's the big deal? And it turns out that a bad actor had been listening all along in that email account and was able to intercept and redirect those funds. And it's long gone by that point. And we've seen this over and over again. You can look it up on the news. AOAOs have been hit, $250,000 they've been defrauded out of, and it takes months to kind of discover these problems. And by that time, it's simply too late to do anything. We see this on a regular basis in businesses of all industries here on Oahu. So be very careful of that spear phishing or the business email compromise. And that business email compromise can be avoided if two-factor authentication is turned on those Office 365
And so
accounts.
let's just make sure,
Yeah.
because I'm not sure, we all know what two-factor identification means. But what does it mean? Exactly.
Well, if you've ever logged into, I'm speaking to the business owners here. So if you've logged into, like, say, QuickBooks Online, there you cannot progress to beyond a certain point until there's some sort of interaction from you on your cell phone, on your mobile phone. That mobile phone is going to say, hey, punch in the 6-digit code. Many of your credit card companies require this. Taxes, Hawaii, I believe, needs this also. So there are lots of ways to do two-factor authentication, but that simply is a second step before allowing you access to whatever that you're trying to do. Excuse me, running out of steam.
And that's, I mean, I think we're all familiar with it. We just may not know that that's the name given to it. So it's where I try to log in to one of my proprietary private accounts, and it says, well, before you log in, you need to get a number from somewhere else, like a call to my home phone or my cell phone, that confirms it's me, or at least it's a safeguard that it's me, because that number is known to be associated with me. And so I have to go through a step, but yet some people consider that a hassle, but without that, people can get in pretty fast, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately, as I'm sure every cyber professional and network defender will attest, there's a huge pushback from all employees. They don't want to do these kind of basic safeguards. And the SIM swapping problem compounds that, because now someone has stolen your cell phone. So if they do initiate a call or a text message indicating that they want to get inside of your investment account, right? Now all of a sudden they can, because they're the ones holding your cell phone virtually. Now the one step further, which is the push notifications, that's when you see maybe those QR codes. Everyone's gotten kind of familiar with QR codes because we've been starting to go back out to eat after the pandemic, right? And you can't get a menu without that QR code. Those little QR codes also can show up, and they can authenticate on your phone and do a rotating set of numbers. Those are much more difficult for an attacker to replicate. So if you ever have the opportunity to scan a QR code with your phone on your computer screen, use that method. That is much easier than a SIM swapping event. You're probably wondering, like, how hard is it really to get inside of someone's, to take over someone's cell phone? I'm going to give you some real numbers. Are you ready for this? If you have a T-Mobile account for $2,000 on the dark web, you can take someone's T-Mobile account over. AT&T around $6,000, Verizon around $50,000. So I use Verizon.
What do you mean take them? I mean, what do you mean if you have $2,000, you can take over somebody's account?
Absolutely.
You mean
yeah.
buy a phone or buy the software to do it with?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what I was talking about earlier about as a service. So as a service, you can go out and say, look, I'm not technical, but this guy I don't like, or this guy I know has some sort of financial, he's well off, right? I'm going to take over his phone and steal his money. And you can do that without any sort of technical know-how, simply by paying for this. So these dollar amounts, I'm trying to give you specific things that you can walk away with. These dollar amounts are relatively low considering the payoff. All
right. Let me just kind of move around all of you a little bit more, because what I want to do is frame the issue, talk about the threat, but now I want to talk about the solution to it, the preventive measures we can all take, and then we'll try to conclude here on resources that are available to anybody to help with cyber hardening, I guess, is that the proper way to put it? So in other words, prevention. So Jimmie, what are the practical, real world basics to best practices for an individual in their home, which is probably going to be relatively the same, a little more complex, but as you kind of move up the chain to state, county, and federal governments and things like defense and intelligence agencies? I mean, what are the basics?
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to flip that a little bit for you, because I do
Sure.
focus at the state level. And so rather, I think, and I think Vince deals all the time with end user compliance, if you will, and how to get his users like me to do all the right things all the time when we're on the systems. But I wanted to emphasize a couple of things because I think they're important. You mentioned a lot of federal resources and agencies that were working in this sphere. I think one of the things that I wanted to kind of foot stomp is those agencies are also very present here in Hawaii for us. We have a tremendous federal family community out here. It includes the likes of our, DHS, CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. The FBI cyber folks are out here. U.S. Secret Service is out here. Homeland Security Investigations is out here. And with that broader community, including our DoD neighbors, if you will, they've actually been very active in participating with us in developing response plans where we can tap into some of their resources, things that we don't necessarily have all the training for, like your cyber forensics you'd mentioned. So we're actually developing partnerships to expand our capacity where we don't necessarily have budget to extend, our footprint with personnel. And we're doing that with all kinds of support from the federal agencies. And I think the second thing I wanted to mention is that it's really hard to prosecute bad guys in this sphere, especially because they could be anywhere, and they could be anyone. But what helps, or at least we believe is going to help us in the future, is the new federal law that has required reporting, particularly from our critical infrastructure where we're seeing so much activity. And we'll see what the rules look like when that comes out. We're still in that rule writing period, but we're definitely keenly awaiting what that looks like, and if there's anything at the state level we can do to echo what the federal government is trying to do, because the reporting is such a key element. We understand.
You're talking about basic data collection, right? So that's
Yes.
what I was referring to earlier about federal
Right.
initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know what you even need to do if you don't know what's happening out, in the wild, as they say. So that reporting is really important, and it's.
And so, how does that actually work from your perspective, at least? Because you would think that data collection would be not simple, but something that you could achieve on a fairly voluntary basis, but that doesn't turn out to be the case in this particular realm, right? I mean, a lot of people don't want to talk about it.
It hasn't been our experience. Yeah, it hasn't been our experience. And I think historically, you think about businesses who are concerned about proprietary information, they're concerned about their reputation. If it gets out in the news that they got hacked, how's that going to, affect their bottom line? So there's a lot of tension there. But, and I don't know how the federal government's going to make the rules for that mandatory reporting that they've put out there for our critical infrastructure owner operators. And that's why I say that we're watching that space, because we would like to have more information. We would like to know as soon as physically possible when there's a breach or an issue of concern. And it could be, like I said, an individual all the way up to a large business here. We have a fusion center in the state that takes those kinds of, suspicious activity reports, if you will. And we're building out capacity to take on more and more of that cyber reporting. Hopefully, as those rules shake out at the federal level, we'll be able to do some state legislative work too, so that we can pull those through, those rules through to our own approach to cybersecurity here in the state. But even now, we have the mechanism for reporting. We get emails and calls at the Fusion Center. The easiest is the HSFC at hawaii.gov, Hawaii State Fusion Center, HSFC at hawaii.gov. We take in all kinds of reporting there. And as we formalize those processes more, we'll have some more direct ways to report. But that's absolutely critical. That's how we know what kinds of incidents that we're actually facing, what are the entities and the individuals in the state are actually up against, and the kinds of things that we need to do to help support all of those efforts. That data is going to be really critical.
And this reminds me of, and I spent some time with the folks from the Forensic Institute in Alabama that we talked about earlier. A couple of weeks ago, I spent some real good quality time with the folks that are very involved in that. They were wanting to make sure I understood that they were there and what they were doing from the Appropriations Committee's perspective. But it turned into a long meeting that was very, very instructive for me at least. And one of the things that I took away from that I hadn't really focused on, and that is that speed of reporting is really, really critical in this
Yes.
area.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you kind of get cyber attacked and you figure that you've been cyber attacked and days go by before you report it, it's history already.
Yeah.
But if you report it immediately, you may actually catch it in the process of unfolding, and you may still be able to detect it out there. I mean, is that an accurate way? Accurate. So I mean,
yeah, depending on the whole methodology that's been used, certainly if it's a lingering attack, or even if it's involving the transfer of cryptocurrency or actual money. We've had some direct conversations with our FBI liaisons here, and they're getting better at being more, I want to say more capacity, but getting noticed soon enough that they can actually start to retrieve some of these fraudulent monies. I won't give you percentages because I didn't memorize any of that, but I know that they're definitely building in that arena especially because of the burgeoning ransomware. It's a huge profit industry, unfortunately, now.
That's a great example where FBI helped out there.
Okay, Vince,
last year.
Practical best practices. 3 or 4. What are the top 4? Best practices that you instruct state employees, all state employees, to follow to protect against cyber attack. And let's go back to a point that you made earlier, and that is that you can access the state of Hawaii's system for your own purposes with a lot of information in there and a lot of capability. And so can a lot of other people that are all authorized to do that. And every single one of those people is therefore a potential target of attack, because that's the entree into the state system for somebody willing and able to do us harm. So what are the requirements of the state of Hawaii in terms of cyber defenses? You talked about push notifications, 2-factor authentication. Let's talk about passwords a little bit, because I think this is a confusion to me. In all honesty, how do you keep a whole bunch of passwords going? What's the best practices on passwords? I'm told not to do the same password for every one of them. I follow that advice, by the way. But I'm at an age when I can't remember 20 passwords anymore. So what exactly? So tell us the best practices.
So I will list some examples where you as a state employee and the same practices will help you protect your own assets at home. One is we mandate and require for any external access to require MFA with a push.
MFA is multi-factor identification. So that's the 2-factor identification we already talked about.
Yes, this is using the phone.
That's push. A requirement now.
Yeah, it's an absolute requirement to access the internet. Yes, and then we have by policy to help minimize some of the noise. Is that we're only permitting that login attempt to even to happen when it's coming from an IP address. You're coming from an internet address that's known to be from a U.S. location, meaning that if you travel to Canada or Mexico or China, you're not going to be able to log in unless you actually let us know in advance and tell us you're going to be traveling. And then we make a decision where, is this purely travel or do you need to really have access at that time? And if it is, it's for legitimate business purposes, we'll allow that exception. But what this means is that we're only allowing one traveler from that to another country at a time versus leaving it wide open. So that
and
really
what's the practical result of that? I mean, we have risk from inside the United States. You're just minimizing risk, right?
It's the noise, meaning that if we're turning on MFA, multi-factor authentication, what we'll see is we're just going to see brute force attacks 24/7 by sheer volume. And if we are trying to monitor and filter between what should be actionable versus what's very low confidence, not actionable, there's a lot of noise. So by implementing that policy, we reduce that noise and there's more signal for us to focus on. So if we know you're not traveling and then we get someone logged in with a valid user and a valid password, but it failed the push, from, let's say, from France this time, we have high confidence that that's really not you. And so when we reach out, our team reaches out to the department or respiratory agency and ultimately to get to you, it's like, hey, we noticed a very unusual sign in from France. Were you traveling? Or we're using some kind of proxy kind of to help mask your IP. Odds are that wasn't the case. And say, oh, I clicked on a funny link and nothing happened. So I thought there was no issue. So I just moved on. So those are different areas of what we try to do to help get a more defense in depth. Right, to kind of rephrase and take home is that we try very hard to layer in security, but to the point where that we want to be as frictionless as possible. So an example here is that if you actually register your device and you get that push, what this means is that if that push is registered properly, you're not going to be prompted for a password from your phone as much as you would if otherwise. So it's based on a risk event. We're using machine learning with a subscription from Microsoft, for example, is that there are detections and rules like to help understand what normal behavior is. And when something is out of bounds of what's not normal, then the additional challenge comes in. So we provide the additional verification. Right. So I put a lot of time and effort into, yes, that really is the one take home message, just the one thing to take home. And all this is turning on MFA with your accounts, both state, with organizational and on your personal devices, especially for your banks and your financial accounts. Please ensure that that is protected. Another high guidance is turn on automatic updates. In the past 10, 15, 20 years ago, IT systems were very, very sensitive, meaning that when you get to work, you don't want to touch it. And we're just going to leave it on. Let's make sure it doesn't ever crash and don't even try to turn it off. But we're at the point right now where software is a lot less flimsy and fragile, where turning on automatic updates is usually the best practice. One is that there's higher QA and software is less likely to break now statistically than before. There are exceptions here and there, but by and large, so that we have so many internet connected devices now, if we don't turn on those automatic updates, that you're more likely to be targeted for an attack. So we do that on the state side of one, by paper, by policy, by practice, is turning on and trying to manage those updates for you and help be transparent so you're not even aware of it. But where the private sector is helping us as well is with your phones, for example. If you have a Google phone or Apple, they're going to warn you. Like say a decade ago, you would need to actually plug in your phone into a Mac and then download this huge file and then do a patch and update. What you do right now is you get a little notification on your phone that says, hey, we're going to update your phone while you sleep. Just make sure it's plugged in. And so you'll see that we've evolved and you're trying to make things a lot more customer end user friendly. And the term is I really want to take home is frictionless. So the private sector is really, really leading the charge, especially large companies, because the more frictionless we are and the more safe we provide service to you, the more likely to subscribe. And then we want to take that same practice that's been executed well in the private sector and then do the same thing within state government as well. So those are like two big things. You mentioned passwords. The take-home message here is the jargon term is credential stuffing. People are lazy, they can't remember everything. And so if you use a poor password at one site, statistically, it's more like that you're going to be using it on another site. And so once one poorly secured website gets compromised, the bad actor can take your login, your email address, and take that exact password and just spray across the internet for any online service. And statistically, there's going to be very high confidence that they'll be able to break in as well. So this is what we want to be able to do, where MFA, multi-factor authentication, helps protect against that kind of issue. Second is that if you if your environment isn't protected by MFA, use a unique password. So if you generate one unique password in one site and it gets compromised, you know with high confidence that you haven't repurposed that password anywhere else. And so you're not going to be rushed. You know, let's say you sign up for 20 different accounts online and one of your accounts gets disclosed as a breach. This means you have to make this mad dash of logging into all your 19 other sites and changing the passwords so that that bad actor can't get into your
Okay.
environment. All right.
All
So,
right.
yeah.
So that's a couple of pointers there. Multi-factor identification came through loud and clear. Automatic updates came through loud and clear. Push notifications. And let's go to Attila here. What's your top 4 list? I'm sure that's going to be relatively the same, but let me ask you again the issue that I think is just a real basic one, and that is how do you handle passwords? What's the best practice for doing the right thing on passwords in a way that actually works for you in a day-to-day environment at home?
Sure. It's actually easier than you think because I'm lazy. And like most people, I don't have time to stuff a bunch of passwords in my brain. So I use a password manager. They're free. And even the paid ones are pretty inexpensive. A couple bucks, generates random passwords for you. You go to a website, it does the lazy thing. It fills it in. You don't have to think. But I wanted to focus on something that we haven't talked about because it's so important. And that is strengthening the human firewall. Like right now, I put out a special advisory about how Hawaii government contractors are currently under attack by cyber criminals. I did a whole write-up, screenshots, the whole thing, and it shows exactly how these very well-crafted emails that, no bad English, like really well. It's a complete clone of the Hawaii.gov website, very well put together. And these email attacks have been going on for the past couple of weeks, and they're targeting government contractors, right? If you strengthen the human firewall, then there's less risk of them actually clicking on it and putting in their credentials, right? We were just doing a webinar for the Maui Chamber maybe a couple months ago, and one of the ladies we happen to know who was attending the webinar, her mom was, she's living at home. Her mom walked behind her and was running out the door very quickly. And she said, "Mom, where are you going?" And she said, "Oh, I have to deliver these gift cards." She says, "What do you mean you have to deliver these gift cards?" She says, "Yeah, I got to deliver these gift cards because if I don't, the IRS is going to come get me." Right? That's a perfect, and I know people smile when they hear that, but do you know how many times I've heard that story? And many times when I bring this up, they say, "Oh, wait, that happened to someone I know. That was a scam." Oh, you're right. And this is all across the board. You got to strengthen the human firewall. And I know
What does
it's
that
hard.
actually mean? Strengthen the human firewall? You mean get people sensitized to all of this stuff, and
They
to
have to be
be able to?
exposed. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You're entirely right. They have to be exposed and understand that this is part of the new reality of the world. The internet is not what it was 10 years ago. And so the digital native population is now the ones responsible for training, a little bit of the older or the senior type of managers and people who are running our organizations against these new kinds of problems and these new threats, because it comes in a very simple way, right? Email. You wouldn't even think about it. We've had email for decades, right? Why is this so different now? But if you don't have the proper training behind that, and it's not that hard. I think everyone on this call can attest. Basic training on how to identify some of these threats will help in a long way. And the flip side of that is just look at the news again. Just a few weeks ago, one of the major fiber interconnects that connects our islands with the rest of the world was almost taken down. And how did that happen? It came in through phishing email. Now, luckily, they were able to stop that. It was a very large coordinated effort that was international. It was really cool. But you see that on the Colonial Pipeline attack from earlier this year, right? Shut down the eastern supply of fuel. That came in what? Email. And then that was industrial control systems, right? So ICS. So those industrial control systems are sometimes connected to the same networks as the IT networks. So OT, and IT. And the IT networks, when they come in and those emails come in, they can cross over into the OT networks and shut down the fuel lines. So We don't want those kind of things to happen here in our state. So that kind of behavioral understanding that cybersecurity is not 100% a technology product, right? You can geofence your firewalls all day long. That's helpful. But if that email comes in and someone clicks
Right.
on it and they go in through the back door, you're screwed, right? So we don't want that. That's what we try to
Okay.
help and educate.
All right. Well, okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. So I've got a couple of practical comments here. Push notifications, multi-factor authorization, automatic updates, get a password manager. I think those are 4 practical pointers to get people started. We're running down to the end of our time. So let me ask you kind of each a quick final question here. So I'm here. I'm from Congress. I'm here to help you. What can your federal government do? What do you want your federal government, your Congress? What do you want me to do about this? What is my role here, Jimmie?
More. I mean, I think I am just incredibly excited to see the moves that the federal government has made recently, whether it's the reporting or the development of the state and local cybersecurity grant program. Those are all game changers for us at the state and the county levels, trying to build out broad statewide kinds of campaigns and programs. And I'm extremely excited to see the allocation that we're going to get for the state and the planning we can do to develop this real holistic approach that I think we've landed on, that's going to help the state broadly. And sorry, I've got a bug in my house. Anyway, so all of those things are great, but they didn't go quite far enough. We'd like to see more involvement in our ability to interact with the critical infrastructure sectors. So important, whether it's delivery of fuel or electricity, water, wastewater, telecommunications, my gosh, and transportation. Those are all so important, and cybersecurity is a fundamental capability within all of them. And I don't think the grants give us that much reach. But the other really critical community, I think, is getting back to where most of our conversation has been. It's like at the individual and the small and medium-sized business level, where we can go after big stuff like all statewide kinds of infrastructure. We haven't really been able to get the resourcing to get as deep and as broad as we'd like to across the community. We're looking at partnerships and developing messaging campaigns, for example, for individuals, and the kinds of things that they just need to have ingrained for their own security. But resourcing that a little bit more would be helpful for us to get as big as the problem is, really, is
Okay.
what we're trying to say.
Got it. Heard. Vince, quickly, what can I do?
One is the federal government's already doing a lot between the various programs with CISA and the various information sharing assessment centers. Through a lot of the federal funding, we have 24/7 network monitoring on the state infrastructure through the multi-state information sharing analysis center, for example. And the new grant request that's coming in related to the infrastructure bill, that's going to be hoping that'll be a significant bump to serve as a catalyst so that we help modernize a lot of our infrastructure that's getting older, that needs a refresh. And
Right.
hopefully we'll be able to move that dial forward so that we can more across the board meet these minimum guidelines so that we're not easy targets.
No, thanks for reminding me that you're referring to the bipartisan infrastructure package that we passed,
Yes.
the 1.1 trillion that we passed late last year, that is bringing a lot of money throughout the states, including a couple billion, 3 billion, as I recall, here to Hawaii, and this is infrastructure. We're talking about, we're not talking about roads and sewers, but we're talking about the infrastructure of technology. So
yes, there's a large
thanks for reminding me that we're trying to help there. Okay, Attila, you got the last say. What do you want Congress to do here?
Well, I'm going to speak on behalf of the business community. From what I'm told, as a business owner myself, it's very expensive in Hawaii to operate. And so much of the problems that we see are a result of deferred maintenance. And that can be from everything from employee security awareness training, physical infrastructure and upgrades, any sort of software that needs to be done. They'll, us as business owners, we try to squeeze as much as we can, as long as we can. And that unfortunately results in an insecure operating environment. So if there were any assistance that could help maybe incentivize business owners to replace and update and not get into a pattern of deferred maintenance, that would be really great. And then the second thing I could add, because I know we're running out of time, is, I'm a father and I have 2 young kids. And I would like for them to feel safe at night, knowing that the power is going to stay on. So if there's anything you can do to invest in our critical infrastructure to ensure that our economy can continue to operate and not be disrupted, that would be really great. I'd appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Well, there we are. An hour and a half went by in no time at all. And by the way, I'm going to answer one last question here from Reed, which is, what legislation are you pushing forward with regard to mandating data breach notification and reporting? Reed, we talked about this earlier in our show. We actually have passed legislation to that effect that requires reporting so that we have a better handle on it. And that's being implemented right now. I also am co-sponsoring legislation to expand those reporting requirements. So you're on the right track there, and we understand the importance of additional information here. I really, I feel like I still feel like we identified some of the scope of the threat. Hopefully, we heightened people's sensitivity to taking precautions. I think that we tried to provide some practical pointers. I think what we haven't done enough of, and I'm going to try to do it myself, is to, as Jimmie said, to outreach to people to get information on a much broader level. The federal government has a lot of resources, a lot of information. I try to put some of that out through my own resources, have done that, especially, for example, after the Russian attack on Ukraine, when we had a much higher heightened sensitivity to cyber attack across our entire country. The federal government asked each and all of us, members of Congress, to advise everybody in terms of cyber attack, cyber security, cyber prevention. And I try to get that out, but I have to confess that it's difficult to get that information out. So I think where I can contribute, besides the funding that you have all talked about and the assistance to businesses to pursue cybersecurity, just the basic centralization of information and a better distribution system for information, so people can actually get the information that they need to make these decisions and take these practices, whether it be personal, business, or government. So with that, Jimmie, Vince, Attila, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope that people that were watching found this informational. And again, case.house.gov is my website, and ed.case@mail.house.gov. Any follow-up questions, I'm happy to try to answer them, get you the information that you need. But otherwise, thank you so much for your service in this critical and evolving area that's critical to all of us. And look forward to working with all of you. And I appreciate your advice. And I bid you all a fond aloha and a good evening.
Aloha.
Stay
Thank
safe.
you.
Aloha.